The Old Testament. Just hearing those words might make some eyes glaze over, or minds wander to distant memories of school reading assignments, endless lists of names, and dense chapters filled with laws and rituals that seem hard to relate to. It's a massive collection, 39 books, hundreds of thousands of words, and stories spanning over 1,000 years. If you've ever tried to dive into it, you might have started with the very first book, Genesis, full of wonder and mystery, only to find your attention drifting away somewhere around Leviticus or Numbers. It raises a simple but frustrating question: how do you make sense of it all? Is there a way to navigate this vast and complex text without feeling overwhelmed or lost? Imagine this. What if you could take all these books, all these stories, laws, prophecies, and poetry, and condense them into a single clear journey that gives you the big picture, a narrative that makes sense and connects the dots? Instead of seeing the Old Testament as a confusing patchwork of disconnected writings, you'd discover it as one epic story with a powerful message that still speaks today. This is exactly what we're about to do. In the next half hour, you'll get a guided tour through the Old Testament's main storyline, focusing on the heart of the message rather than getting bogged down in every detail. But how is this possible? The Old Testament isn't just a history book or a random collection of ancient texts. It's a carefully woven story centered around one main relationship, the relationship between God and humanity. To help us navigate this, we'll have a knowledgeable guide, someone who understands the depths and nuances of these ancient writings, but can also explain them clearly and engagingly. Think of this guide as your personal storyteller, someone who will walk you through the major moments and characters without losing sight of the bigger picture. Before we dive into the story itself, it's important to recognize why the Old Testament often feels so overwhelming. First, there are the sheer numbers, 39 books, from Genesis to Malachi, each written by different authors over centuries. You encounter everything from creation myths, epic battles, genealogies, detailed laws, poetry, wisdom sayings, to prophetic visions. It's like reading dozens of books at once, each with its own style and focus. Second, the context is foreign to many modern readers. The world of the Old Testament is ancient and distant, filled with cultural practices, religious customs, and historical events that can seem strange or confusing. Without a roadmap, it's easy to get lost in the details and miss the main story. Third, many people approach the Old Testament with preconceived notions. Some see it as just a religious text full of rules and moral lessons, others as an outdated historical document, and some as a source of mystery or even contradiction. This makes the reading experience intimidating or discouraging. So, what if instead of trying to read the Old Testament book by book or verse by verse right away, we start by focusing on its core narrative? By zooming out, we can capture the broad strokes, the main characters, the key turning points, and the big themes. This approach doesn't ignore the details, but gives you a framework to understand where everything fits. Think of it like watching a movie. If you watch every scene in order without knowing the plot, you might get confused or miss important connections. But if someone first tells you the story's overview, the main conflict, the heroes, and the climax, then watching the scenes makes much more sense. This is exactly what we aim to do with the Old Testament. We'll start by laying out the master story arc, the central relationship between God and humanity, and how that relationship unfolds through history. Along the way, you'll meet the key characters, from the very first humans to the great leaders, judges, and prophets who shaped this story. You'll see how their lives and choices reveal the tensions and hopes at the heart of the Old Testament. By the end of this overview, you'll have a clear mental roadmap, a way to see how the various books and stories fit together. Instead of feeling like isolated texts, they will come alive as parts of one continuous narrative, a story about creation, failure, promise, rescue, and hope. This also sets the stage for deeper exploration. Once you understand the big picture, you can return to the individual books with fresh eyes, seeing how each contributes to the overall story. Whether you're a student, a seeker, a believer, or simply curious, this approach helps you connect with the Old Testament in a meaningful way. So, as we prepare to begin this journey, keep in mind these key points. The Old Testament is not just a collection of random writings. It tells one grand story. It centers on a relationship between a creator God and the people he made. This relationship is marked by moments of closeness and distance, faithfulness and failure, judgment and grace. And understanding this story is possible even in a short time when you focus on the main arc and the key players. With that in mind, get ready to meet the characters and themes that will guide us through this fascinating and ancient narrative. It's a story that has shaped history, culture, and faith for millennia. And it has something to say to all of us today. Now that we've set the stage by recognizing the vastness and complexity of the Old Testament, let's zoom out and look at the big picture, the master story arc that ties all its parts together. At the heart of this ancient collection is one central theme, the unfolding relationship between God and his people. This is not just a background detail. It's the thread that weaves through every book, every story, every law, and every prophecy. To help us navigate this story, imagine a simple roadmap divided into 4 major phases. These phases are like chapters in a larger narrative that reveal how God interacts with humanity, how people respond, and how the story moves forward over time. The first phase is creation and fall. Here, the story begins with God creating a perfect world and humanity designed to live in harmony with Him and with each other. But something goes wrong. Human choices introduce brokenness and separation from God, setting the stage for everything that follows. Next comes promise and patriarchs. In this phase, God initiates a plan to restore the broken relationship through a special family. Starting with Abraham, God makes specific promises about land, descendants, and blessing that begin to shape the identity of a people chosen to be part of His plan. The third phase is Exodus and law. This is where the family grows into a nation and experiences rescue from slavery in Egypt. At Mount Sinai, God gives laws that aren't just rules, but guidelines to live as His covenant people. This period highlights themes of trust, obedience, and community as the people journey toward the promised land. Finally, we have kingdom and prophecy. This phase covers the rise and fall of Israel's monarchy, the splintering of the kingdom, and the voices of prophets who call the people back to faithfulness. Even in the face of failure and exile, these prophets keep alive the hope of restoration and a future kingdom. When you line these phases up on a timeline, you see a clear progression, a story moving from perfect beginnings through crisis, promise, rescue, and hope. This roadmap helps us understand that the Old Testament is not a random collection, but a continuous narrative revealing God's plan for humanity. But who are the main characters in this story? The ultimate protagonist is God Himself. He is the Creator, the Judge who responds to human choices, and the Redeemer who pursues His people despite their failures. God's character is revealed through the way He interacts with humanity, full of justice, mercy, patience, and love. Opposite God, the supporting cast is humanity, especially the ancestors of Israel. They are flawed and often fail. but they are chosen to be part of God's unfolding plan. Starting with Adam and Eve, humanity's story continues through key figures like Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and David. Each of these individuals plays a crucial role in shaping the narrative, reflecting both human weakness and the potential for faithfulness. In addition to these central characters, you'll meet judges, priests, prophets, kings, and ordinary people, all contributing to the story's texture and depth. Their lives show the tension between human rebellion and divine faithfulness that drives the Old Testament's drama. Understanding the stakes is crucial. This isn't just a historical account, it's a story about relationships, identity, and destiny. The tension arises because humanity struggles to live up to God's design and covenant, leading to cycles of failure and restoration. Yet through it all, God remains faithful, continually calling people back into relationship and promising a future hope. Visualizing this story can make it easier to grasp. Picture a timeline with 4 major segments: creation and fall, promise and patriarchs, Exodus and law, and kingdom and prophecy. Along this timeline, key figures and events mark turning points. Adam and Eve's choice, Abraham's covenant, the Exodus from Egypt, the giving of the law, the reign of King David, the warnings of the prophets, and the exile to Babylon. Each book of the Old Testament fits somewhere on this timeline, contributing to the unfolding narrative. Genesis introduces the beginning. Exodus tells the story of rescue. Leviticus and Deuteronomy explain the laws guiding life. Joshua and Judges narrate the conquest and settlement. Samuel and Kings trace the monarchy, and Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others voice prophetic calls to faithfulness and hope. By seeing the Old Testament as one epic story told in 39 books, you can start to appreciate its unity and purpose. It's a story full of drama, conflict, and resolution, a story that continues to invite readers to engage with its characters and themes. This perspective also helps when approaching the diverse genres within the Old Testament. Whether it's historical narrative, poetry, prophecy, or law, each genre serves the larger story. Laws are not arbitrary rules, but part of God's covenant community. Poetry expresses deep emotions and worship. Prophecies reveal both judgment and hope. Knowing this, you can approach the Old Testament with fresh curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why is this here?" or "What does this mean in isolation?" you begin to ask, "How does this contribute to the story of God and His people?" Or, "What does this reveal about the relationship between God and humanity?" As we move forward, keep this roadmap in mind. The characters and phases we've introduced will guide the unfolding story. You'll see how God's promises unfold through history, how people respond in faith or failure, and how hope remains alive even amid challenges. This big-picture view also sets the stage for exploring deeper themes like covenant, justice, mercy, and redemption that are woven throughout the Old Testament. These themes are not just ancient ideas, but resonate with universal human experiences and questions about identity, purpose, and hope. So, as we prepare to dive into the stories themselves, remember, the Old Testament is one continuous story about a relationship marked by love, rebellion, judgment, and grace. God is the protagonist, humanity the chosen but flawed participants, and the narrative unfolds through 4 key phases that shape the destiny of a people and, ultimately, the world. With this roadmap, you're ready to meet the characters and witness the events that bring this story to life. The journey ahead will take us from the beginnings of creation to the heights of kingdom and the voices of prophets, all pointing toward a future hope that shapes the entire biblical narrative. Now that we have the big picture in mind, the four major phases and the key characters, let's begin unfolding the story itself, starting with the earliest chapters of Genesis. The story opens with creation, a world crafted by God in perfect order. Everything was good. Humanity was made in God's image, created to live in harmony with Him and with one another. This beginning sets the stage for understanding what God intended for the world and for us. But then comes the turning point, the fall. Adam and Eve, the first humans, make a choice to disobey God. This decision fractures the relationship between God and humanity, introducing sin, pain, and death into the world. The harmony of creation is broken, and with it, the story takes on a new tension. The tension between God's good design and human failure. Genesis chapters 1 through 11 cover this foundational period. We see not only the fall, but also the consequences spreading across generations. Cain and Abel's conflict, the flood that cleanses a corrupt world, and the scattering of nations at Babel. These stories aren't just ancient myths. They grapple with deep questions about human nature, morality, and the reality of brokenness. Why is the world the way it is? Why do people struggle with right and wrong? These chapters set the stage for the promise of restoration that follows. From here, the narrative shifts to the patriarchs, a group of founding figures who become central to God's plan. Abraham is the first. God calls Abraham out of his homeland and makes a covenant with him, promising land, descendants, and blessing. This is a crucial moment because it moves the story from universal brokenness to a focused hope, a family through whom God will work to restore the world. Abraham's story continues through his son Isaac, his grandson Jacob, and eventually to Joseph. Each of these figures plays a role in shaping the identity of the people who will become Israel. Through trials, failures, and moments of faith, these patriarchs experience God's promises in tangible ways. But the story doesn't stop with just a family. It expands into a nation. Joseph's story leads us to Egypt, where the family moves to escape famine, but eventually becomes enslaved. This sets the scene for the next great chapter, the Exodus. God raises up Moses as the deliverer, the key figure in the ultimate rescue story. Moses leads the people out of slavery, demonstrating God's power and faithfulness. At Mount Sinai, God gives the law, not just a set of rules, but a guide for living in covenant relationship. These laws shape the nation's identity and call them to live differently from surrounding peoples. The wilderness wandering that follows becomes a time of testing and trust, revealing that God's desire is not mere obedience to rules, but a deep familial relationship. This period emphasizes themes of liberation, trust, and community. The story isn't just about escaping slavery. It's about being formed into a people who reflect God's character and purposes. The law serves as a framework for holiness, justice, and mercy. After entering the Promised Land, the narrative moves into the era of conquest and settlement under Joshua and the Judges. This period is marked by cycles of failure and rescue. The people repeatedly turn away from God, face consequences, cry out for help, and receive deliverance from leaders called judges. This pattern illustrates the ongoing tension between human rebellion and divine faithfulness. The story then shifts toward monarchy, beginning with Saul, then David and Solomon. David's reign, in particular, is significant as it establishes a royal line through which God's promises continue. The idea of a kingdom introduces new themes of leadership, power, and covenant. However, the kingdom eventually splits, leading to instability and decline. This sets the stage for the prophets, who emerge as God's messengers during times of crisis. Unlike fortune tellers, the prophets call the people back to justice, mercy, and faithfulness. They warn of consequences, but also offer hope for restoration. The prophets speak during the Babylonian exile, a period of great suffering and displacement. Their messages remind the people that even in exile, God's promises remain and a future kingdom will come. This hope becomes a central theme, pointing toward a new beginning beyond the present hardship. Through all these phases, the story maintains its focus on the covenant relationship. It highlights human failure, but never loses sight of God's persistent grace. The narrative weaves together moments of judgment and mercy, despair and hope. As we trace this journey, from creation through the patriarchs, the Exodus, the conquest, the kingdom, and the prophets, we see a story full of complexity and depth. It's a story about a people learning what it means to live in relationship with God, about God's faithfulness despite human shortcomings, and about a future hope that drives the narrative forward. This unfolding story invites readers to engage with its characters and themes on multiple levels. It challenges us to consider questions of obedience, justice, identity, and hope. It reveals the human struggle with faith and failure, while also showcasing the possibility of redemption. By following this narrative thread, we begin to see how the Old Testament's diverse books and genres contribute to a unified story. Historical accounts, laws, poetry, and prophecy all serve the larger purpose of telling the story of God and His people. With this understanding, the Old Testament transforms from a distant ancient text into a living story that addresses fundamental human experiences. It speaks about beginnings and brokenness, about promises and rescue, about leadership and justice, and ultimately about hope that endures even in the darkest times. As we continue, this story will deepen, showing how these themes develop and pointing toward the fulfillment that lies ahead. As we reflect on the story we've explored so far, it's clear that the Old Testament is much more than a collection of ancient writings. It's a unified narrative shaped by powerful themes that resonate across time and culture. To truly appreciate its significance, we need to connect the dots and understand why this story matters, not just historically, but for us today. One of the most pervasive themes that runs through the Old Testament is faithfulness. God's unwavering commitment to His covenant people stands in stark contrast to humanity's frequent unfaithfulness. Despite repeated failures and rebellion, God remains steadfast, patiently calling people back into relationship. This theme challenges readers to consider the nature of commitment and loyalty, not only in a religious sense, but in how we relate to others and to values that shape our lives. Justice is another key theme woven throughout the narrative. The prophets, in particular, emphasize that true faithfulness includes care for the vulnerable, fairness in society, and the pursuit of righteousness. The Old Testament presents a God deeply concerned with how people treat one another, highlighting the social implications of faith. This focus invites reflection on issues of justice and mercy in our own communities and challenges us to act with integrity and compassion. Redemption and hope also pulse at the heart of this ancient story. Even when the people face exile, defeat, and despair, the prophets offer visions of restoration and a future kingdom where peace and justice prevail. This hope is not wishful thinking, but a confident expectation rooted in God's promises. It reminds us that stories of hardship can contain seeds of renewal and that no situation is beyond transformation. Beyond these themes, the Old Testament has had a profound influence on literature, law, culture, and religious thought throughout history. Its stories have inspired countless works of art, music, and literature, shaping Western civilization's moral and ethical frameworks. Understanding this influence helps us appreciate the Old Testament's role in cultural literacy and its ongoing relevance in public discourse. But how does this ancient text speak to the modern world? At its core, the Old Testament grapples with universal human concerns, questions about identity, suffering, purpose, and the search for meaning. It offers narratives that explore what it means to be human, to face challenges, to fail, and to hope for redemption. These are experiences that transcend time and culture, making the Old Testament relevant beyond its original context. Approaching these texts today, we can find wisdom in their stories and teachings. Whether through a historical lens, appreciating their place in human development, a literary lens, enjoying their rich storytelling and poetry, or a spiritual lens, seeking guidance and inspiration, the Old Testament invites engagement on multiple levels. Of course, some skeptics question the Old Testament's value or relevance, pointing to its ancient origins, cultural distance, or difficult passages. Yet, understanding the Old Testament's role in shaping ethical thought and cultural identity reveals its importance. Even when viewed critically, these texts provide insight into human nature, societal development, and the enduring quest for justice and meaning. By connecting these dots, faithfulness, justice, redemption, cultural impact, and modern relevance, we see that the Old Testament offers more than history or religion. It presents a framework for understanding human existence and our relationship with the divine and with one another. This perspective encourages us to approach the Old Testament not as a dusty relic, but as a living story with lessons and challenges for today. It invites us to listen to voices across millennia, to wrestle with difficult questions, and to find hope amid life's complexities. As we continue our journey through this remarkable narrative, keep these themes in mind. They will help illuminate the deeper significance of the stories and teachings we encounter, connecting the ancient world to our own and opening doors to new understanding and reflection. As we reach this point in our journey through the Old Testament, it's important to look ahead and see how this vast narrative connects to what comes next, the New Testament, and the arrival of Jesus, who many believe fulfills the hopes and promises woven throughout these ancient texts. The story doesn't stop with the prophets or the exile. It moves forward, inviting us to explore what lies beyond the Old Testament's pages. This bridge forward is vital because it shows that the Old Testament story is part of a larger, unfolding drama. The promises of restoration, the hope of a coming kingdom, and the call to faithfulness all find new expression in the life and teachings of Jesus. Understanding the Old Testament's narrative prepares us to see how these themes are fulfilled or transformed in the New Testament, creating a continuous story that spans both testaments. For those who want to dive deeper, there are countless resources to explore. Study guides, commentaries, and courses can provide detailed insights into the historical context, literary styles, and theological themes. Engaging with these materials can enrich your understanding and reveal new layers of meaning in the texts. But beyond study, the invitation is to approach the Old Testament with confidence and curiosity. Armed with the big picture, you can navigate its diverse books and genres without feeling overwhelmed. You can ask meaningful questions, connect stories to larger themes, and appreciate the richness of this ancient narrative. To keep your interest alive, use tools like visual timelines that map out the phases we covered: the creation and fall, promise and patriarchs, Exodus and law, kingdom and prophecy. Character maps can help you track key figures and their relationships, making the story easier to follow. Relatable examples and intriguing questions can spark reflection and discussion, whether you're reading alone or with a group. Measuring success in this journey isn't about covering every verse, but about deepening understanding and engagement. Sharing insights, asking questions, and discussing the story with others can be signs of meaningful connection. Creating follow-up content, whether through videos, articles, or study sessions, can support ongoing learning and exploration. Ultimately, the goal is to empower you to approach the Old Testament not as an insurmountable challenge, but as a captivating story that speaks into life today. With a grasp of its overarching narrative and themes, you're equipped to explore its details, discover its wisdom, and experience its impact. So as we prepare to move forward, keep this perspective in mind. The Old Testament is the foundation for a story that continues to unfold, inviting each of us into its journey of faith, hope, and transformation.